From the Wall Street Journal, Disney meets roadblocks in releasing movies to China. Yeah, well, no kidding. It's only going to get worse.
Renegade Online.
Well, good morning, everyone. We are going to talk a little bit about this today. This was an article that came out from the Wall Street Journal just a couple of days ago, and it's something that we have been kind of dancing around for some time here. Also on some other channels, some good friends of mine had these discussions during live streams about movies and China releases. Now, obviously, the dynamic has shifted in the last couple of years. China has not been as apt to let movies in, but they do seem to be very selective. We've got movies like Dune and James Bond's No Time to Die. Also, Venom is still slated to get at some point a Chinese release date, although I don't think it's been yet made official. But why is Disney having so much problem right now with getting movies, particularly movies that they have made expressly for China, especially recent ones from the MCU like Shang-Chi? Why are they having so much trouble with it? We're going to talk about that today, but before we get into it, I just want to thank everybody for being here. As always, please hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell. Do share out the video if you enjoy it on Twitter and Facebook and other social media platforms. And also, please make sure that you drop a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on this. I love having discussions, but please make sure you watch the video first to have some discussions on what we talked about, as opposed to just dropping hate mail in the comments, as some people seem to like to do. But we appreciate those as well. They help just as much. So let's get into this article real quick. So the Magic Kingdom is running into trouble in the Middle Kingdom. This is by Eric Schwartzel with the Wall Street Journal. Over the past year or so, releases of 3 Walt Disney Company movies designed for box office appeal in China have been embroiled in political controversies, complicating a decade of unprecedented success in the market for the world's largest entertainment company. The Marvel film Eternals is scheduled for release in early November, but its release in China is uncertain. Let me go ahead and stop the article right there. The release in China is not uncertain. It is not going to happen. That is already a done deal. This is starting to sound like the same kind of language that we heard when Shang-Chi came out, and they were talking about it was uncertain if it was going to be in China, and I said from the very get-go, in fact, I said before the movie came out, this movie would never see the light of day in China, and that's not going to change. We're going to talk about why that is. This is some of the, frankly, big mistakes that Kevin Feige has made, and I think this is part of the mess that a guy like Bob Chapek now, that he's come in and taken the CEO position fully over from Bob Iger, as Bob Iger makes his long goodbye from Disney. This is one of the things that he is really going to have to address going forward, and clean up some of these messes like at Marvel Studios. The Chinese release for that movie, for Eternals, is uncertain after the Chinese director Chloe Zhao was recently lambasted over comments she made about the country in 2013. Sounds familiar. I think we had the same problem with Mr. Simu Liu, who made some disparaging remarks in 2017 on Canadian television about China. Now, look, I want to be very clear. I agree with what Chloe Zhao and with what Simu Liu said about the country. The Chinese Communist Party is not very friendly to its citizens, regardless of the false projection they put out there to the world of how wonderful and benevolent they are. I think we all know that that's pretty much a lie. So I don't fault them one bit for saying this. I do, however, fault Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios for designing movies for China and involving people such as Simu Liu and Chloe Zhao if the design is to get the movie into China. That is just a stupid business decision that should have been avoided in the first place, because this information was out there for some time. It's just that they did not do any research and thought, hey, if we put a Chinese person or a Chinese-looking person, Simu Liu's Canadian, I know he's ethnically Chinese, but if we just put a Chinese person in a movie, in a cast, then China will accept it. I mean, this is the shallowness of the thinking that is going on, at least at Marvel Studios right now by Feige, and that's a problem, especially one that Chapek needs to address. That follows the unexpected plot twist for Shang-Chi and Legend of the Ten Rings, the first Marvel Studios epic to feature a lead Asian superhero, which has yet to secure a Chinese release weeks after its record-setting global premiere. Again, it's not going to. It's never going to see the light of day in China. China has already made this clear. They have, in fact, released in Chinese social media the interview that Simu did on Canadian broadcasting television, where he called China a third world country and that people were starving to death over there. Basically, they have burned Simu in China politically and socially. So there's nothing going forward for Shang-Chi in China, which is going to present Marvel in Phase 4 a lot more problems. We're going to talk about that in a second as well. The trouble started when Mulan released in 2020 and was torpedoed with revelations that it had sent film crews to a controversial province, as well as viewer complaints about historical inaccuracies. Well, the problem with Mulan, of course, was they filmed it in conjunction with, supposedly, a Chinese camp where people go to think very hard. I don't want to say the word on YouTube because they get goofy with stuff like that. But you can figure out where I'm going with this. So that did not sit well. Also, the movie was just plain bad. It was just a bad movie. It had some beautiful scenes of some gorgeous, Chinese war epic type stuff. You had Donnie Yen in there, I think, or was it Donnie Yen that was in it? But you had a lot of good actors in there, much like Tony Leung and Shang-Chi. Really, really good Chinese actors. And some of the scenes were beautiful, but everything that made the first Mulan movie so successful and so beloved, one of my favorite animated Disney films of all time, they stripped all that out. And, China is not a fan of having Western studios make Chinese epics. Just as if we were to have a Chinese-made movie about the American West and then try to sell the movie to America, American audience would scratch their head. There's no relationship there. We want to see great Chinese war epics, martial arts movies, stuff like that. And China doesn't want to see us make those. So this is part of Disney's perception problem, or at least the studio's perception problem of how this works. It should seem pretty easy to the average person to figure this one out. All three movies were put into production when China seemed to have limitless box office potential, and now they've become evidence of heightened tensions between the industry and Chinese censors. Doing business with China means never being far from Chinese politics, so on and so forth. Hollywood executives are now observing new scrutiny of Western influence by Chinese audiences, favoritism towards local releases by Chinese officials, and industry-wide crackdown overseen by President Xi Jinping. Look, this is kind of all the stuff, but the bulk of this is we come down here. The Disney titles join several other movies in limbo in China. The October releases Dune and No Time to Die are among the few major recent Hollywood movies to have secured a release there. Movies have gone months without word on other 2021 blockbusters, including Black Widow. Never going to happen there at this point, which has already proliferated on Chinese pirating websites. Again, it's another big reason why it's not going to show up there. Other major releases, Space Jam, Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes, they cast an Asian guy in the role of the titular character. Historically, that had not been the case. But again, they did it trying to woo Chinese audiences, or more importantly, trying to woo the Chinese CCP censor division, which allows movies in to begin with. It did not work. And then, of course, we have the big one. You can see Chinese movies right now, their own Chinese box office is doing extremely well. The Battle at Lake Changjin grossed over $200 million in China on its opening weekend. Doing very well there. Really doing very well. And Venom, Let There Be Carnage, will be hopefully getting there relatively soon. We'll see, because that was a big part of the first Venom movie. But here's the kicker. Disney remains the most heavily invested studio in China. After years of lobbying, the company in 2016 opened a Shanghai Disney resort, a $5.5 billion theme park attraction that was among the first to reopen after Koof. Here's the thing. It's $5.5 billion that the CCP can rip away from Disney anytime they see fit. They'll still keep all the characters. They'll still dress people up in Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck costumes and all this, and there's not a darn thing that Disney can do about it at that point if China decides just to take the whole thing. They own about 50% of the investment there. That's just how the CCP works. Same thing, they take 75% of any box office that goes through there. So when you see movies that do $200, $300, $400 million of box office in China, and you think, wow, that's great. Well, it is, but the American movie studio that put that movie over there, that made that movie, is really only walking away with about 25% of that box office take from China. So, this is an issue going forward. It is still baffling to me that Disney would have allowed this much investment, and this is all under Iger. This is part of the reason why Chapek has a lot of work to do. But this is one of those things that has to be monitored, and we have to see where this is going to go. Because if studios are really going to kind of try to continue to push down the road to try to make revenues, expand the markets in China, they have to learn to play the game. Marvel right now is not playing that game well at all. Kevin Feige has failed miserably at playing this game by trying to, create these films that, frankly, Chinese audiences weren't going to want in the first place, cast with actors that China absolutely doesn't want, or directed by people like Chloe Zhao that China absolutely does not want. And again, nothing against Simu Liu or Chloe Zhao personally. Again, I happen to agree with some of their statements on China itself and the government that runs it. But that's a bad pick if you want to sell a movie there. And the question becomes now, can Kevin Feige and the MCU ever use the character of Shang-Chi or Simu Liu again in another Marvel movie, unless they're willing to concede the fact that the movie likely will not be allowed into China? I don't know. Or will they cut two different versions of a movie? So if they make like a new Avengers-style movie where you have an ensemble cast, if the character of Shang-Chi is an integral part of that film, will it be allowed into China? Probably not at this point. I mean, if you've burned the character and his origin story because of the actor cast in the role, I don't see how China would then allow that character to just pop up out of the blue to their audiences in a future film. So either they have to get rid of the character, or they have to concede the fact that they won't get into a Chinese market anymore, or they're going to have to cut multiple versions of the same movie, one for everybody else with that character, in this case Shang-Chi, in it, and then another version of that same movie without Shang-Chi in it. What do you do? I mean, we've had this before where Hollywood studios have had to cut things out or reshoot or make a slightly different version of a film to appease Chinese censors to get it into the market. So this has affected Disney probably more than anyone, just because of the amount of capital that they have put into China over the years. And I really think this is one of the things that Bob Chapek is probably taking a good hard look at, because with the types of budgets that's being spent on Marvel movies. To just give you a comparison, think for a moment of the movies we've just recently had. We have made two superhero blockbuster movies, budget-wise, in Black Widow and Shang-Chi, both of which had about $200 million production budgets. Now, Shang-Chi, again, reportedly got a $50 million Australian film tax credit to bring that net cost of production down to around $150. I don't think Black Widow got such a tax credit. But we had a movie like Venom 2 that just came out that has been very successful and will probably be at least as successful or very close to in the domestic market as Shang-Chi was, where Shang-Chi really underperformed and did very poorly in international markets by comparison, especially to other Marvel films, and that's where Shang-Chi failed to cross the profit line, was in the international realm. Venom 2 has, that'll be opening up in the international markets this weekend. We'll see where it goes. But if you look at it, if it just crosses the $400 to $450 million mark globally, once it completes its run, once it gets into the international markets, that's a movie that cost about $110 million to make. So Bob Chapek has got to be asking himself, how is it that Sony is doing this and we're spending this much more on each one of these movies? How is it these other studios are making these superhero-type movies with relatively similar, capacities for CGI and post-production, and the costs are staying down as much as they are? Again, this has got to be something that Chapek, especially a guy like Chapek, is looking at, wondering, and especially now when such movies are made for markets specifically for China, like Shang-Chi was, and they're not getting in there. Something's going to have to change. And Bob Chapek and the higher-ups at Disney, I think, know it. Leave a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts on this one. And until next time, take care.